Hello, and welcome to your first lesson in the Social Studies High Set Preparation. So, for our first lesson, we are going to be talking about working with the central idea and details. So, with the central idea, you draw your conclusions. We have the main point, you have different little examples that then build up your main point. Here we have different little details. This is a very simple graphical representation on how details form a main idea, which in this case is considered in its entirety an argument. They might not be completely independent of each other, they might depend on each other and then build for new points. Have you ever been in an argument with someone or trying to explain for reasons why you need to maybe buy something, like, well, and another reason, and because of that reason mixed with this reason, then we get another reason. Same thing. This is a skill that you're going to be seeing not just in social studies and history, but in decision making. This becomes very important with understanding like where a company's direction is going to be going. Also very big in science, and you will have to use a little bit of math for the social studies. Do not worry. The craziest they'll get is just finding the average or finding the trend of the graph, saying like, okay, what's the most significant part here? What is the main idea? What's the big idea? And especially with current events that are happening now, there's a lot of details. And what gets remembered are only very few of the details, but what remains is the main idea. That's what we're going to end up remembering. Same thing if you watch a movie, you might remember just a few of the details, but you will see the main idea. So let's read this passage. Because that's a whole lot of words, let's make it easier to read and do this. At the beginning of the American Revolutionary War, the American colonies had a small navy of only 31 ships. To contest, and here I defined how they're using the word contest, to beat the far superior number of ships, in the British fleet, equivalents of navy, the colonies employed privateers, independent ships authorized to harass and capture enemy merchant and cargo ships. Armed with more than 14,000 guns, American privateers captured well over 2,000 enemy ships. These figures demonstrate how difficult it would have been without the aid of privateers for the colonies to win their independence against a larger, better equipped British Navy. Okay. You may have remembered back in grade school having having to read and popcorn reading, and then the teacher all of a sudden asked, okay, so like, what do you think of it? What the teacher was really asking, like, what's the main idea or what's a detail that struck out to you? So after reading this whole passage, what's the main point? It's basically praising the privateers because they helped the American revolutionaries because they wouldn't have won otherwise, because the British fleet was so much more powerful, but not powerful enough to not be defeated by the help of privateers. Privateers, by the way, it just means someone that's not like backed by the government. So like the opposite of private is public. Same thing, kind of like how United States Postal Service, USPS, the one who delivers mail to your mailbox, they are backed by the government, whereas like UPS, FedEx, and DHL, those are like public companies. So you may have to read a few, like a passage like this. Not all of your questions are going to be passages. If you have the option of skipping, go ahead. You don't want to tire yourself out. So, from the topic, or the main point, let's write this down. Got a firm right there. So the topic, and it might give you different, a question is, it might give you the passage and then ask you, which of the following answer choices is the main point? So the main point for this passage is the importance of Colonial privateers, basically mercenaries, privateers, to winning the American Revolutionary War. So that's the main idea. Some details. American Navy only had 31 ships. Normally, numbers equal details. 31 ships, they're talking, they had 14,000 guns, and these privateers were able to get 2,000 enemy ships. 31 ships. These 31 ships no longer had to deal with 2,000 enemy ships. Wow, they really helped out. If I was on one of these ships, I would be very grateful of not having to deal with this. Okay. So, next thing that we're going to do is that we looked at a passage. Let's look at a chart. I know this goes very much into science and math, but social studies also is represented through like graphical representations. So let's use typing productivity. So we're labeling our chart or a graph. X and Y axis. And just a disclaimer, this is not drawn to scale. Because our main focus here is not math, it is seeing trends. And just like how people who follow stocks, the Dow Jones is down 10 points today. That's something over a day. It's not an a large trend. So you just want to get the main idea. Details always end up just going away after time, unless they're incredibly significant. Okay. And suppose I'll use a different color. I'm sorry. I was modifying this problem to be easier for us. Okay, so here we have, we're talking about typing productivity. So here we're seeing how the number of like reports typed out by a group of typists changes with the number of typists available. So when we only have one person typing, we see around, let's use this color, this many reports be typed. And then when we had two people, we had around this many reports typed out. And then when we had three people, we had almost 60 reports. Okay, so we're seeing you add more people, you end up becoming more productive. However, you start to notice that it plateaus. Plateau, okay, what does that mean? Plateau means it becomes flat. The changes don't become as evident after a while. So 5 then becomes 80. And 6. We just see a little bit of 80. So normally, so if you have one person typing, okay, you only get like less than 20 reports. Let's say 15 reports typed out. But then when you have 2, okay, maybe like 35. You get 3, you get almost 60 reports. So it's more significant if the slope is steeper. So like, kind of just imagine that you're hiking. And it's more significant, the change in elevation, or the change is more significant the steeper it is. The flatter it is, not much change. Actually, if it's completely flat, there is no change at all. So what we can also see is that if you add too much, it becomes less productive. So if I had to hire people, I might only just hire 5. Because hiring the 6th typist or having a 6th person come into work in that shift isn't going to make a dramatic difference. In fact, it might hurt productivity. So, the main idea of this graph is productivity rises with more typists until not being as significant past the 5th typist. So we're just looking at this objectively, like, okay, so like from the 80 reports to maybe like 84 reports, 4 reports, doesn't really seem a big deal for having added that last person. But that change, we also have to remember, we have to look at things in context. So let's say I am a car manufacturer and I have a 90% accuracy with building cars. Okay, 90%. That's not bad. Yeah, but that's 10% of cars are going to come out messed up. Those cars are very expensive to make. And if I'm making a worthless product, I'm losing money. And if I'm making like thousands or millions of cars, that 10% becomes very drastic. So you need to look at the big idea. And then because with social studies, you can't just look at it as science. It is a different kind of science, but you're trying to be a little bit more humane. And you have to look at it in context, in relation to the times. Why is it so significant? Okay. Like, right now, gasoline prices are fluctuating, and gas changing by a few cents isn't a big deal so much, but back in the day when gasoline was normally 5 cents per gallon, a 10-cent or 30-cent difference is so much more drastic back then. So we're going to go on to our next lesson. And that is interpreting words and ideas. Oops, let me just bring that closer. and ideas. So when you're interpreting different social studies materials, you need to understand the key terms. You might already know like the everyday use of a word, like, for example, articles of clothing. But this is like everyday lingo. Versus, okay, I just want to let you know, for those of you that are not just listening to me, that they're actually looking at the screen, there is no rhyme or pattern to the different ways I color code. It's only just to help distinguish on that same page. So the color coding will change throughout the pages. So we have an article of clothing, but if we say Article 2 in the U.S. Constitution, that is very different. That's actually talking about a section. This means a section, or a kind of like a chapter. Whereas an article of clothing means like an item. If you look at it very objectively, yes. So an article is an item. It's like a little piece of information, or a little piece or a thing. Here it means more like a piece. Just to let you know, everyday use words will help you understand a word if you don't know it, but it's going to be altered a little bit. So we're going to be looking at interpreting words and ideas, especially like graphical representations, and they love using chronological time orders. So let me draw a timeline. And you don't need to know the name of like these different graphical representations. So it's going to be labeled with a title. So it's going to be called Inventions in the 1870s. So in the year 1875, we have the 1876. 1877, and then we'll have a little gap right here. Sometimes they'll like symbolize a break in time with a little gap. They might not. So like this was supposed to be 1978, but we just went ahead to 1979. So we can put that there's blasting gel. Don't want to put that in my hair. The telephone. And then the cylinder polygraph. The carbon arc. And the light bulb. The cash register. Cha-ching. Carbon filament. So we went from arc to filament. And a different kind of light bulb. So we went from carbon arc to carbon filament. So when you have a question about a timeline, it's usually going to be like what happened first, what was the latest invention, and this is where the English language can be very brutal for non-dominant speakers, where it says latest means newest. I know, right? Whereas, like, what's your latest model? So, like, latest version. It means newest. I remember when we were covering this in fourth grade, and we actually had like the little valedictorian of our elementary school, and he got a question wrong because he understood latest as like oldest. Whereas like if you're looking at light bulbs, the oldest model between these two would be the carbon arc light bulb. But the newest version, the latest, would be the carbon filament light bulb because it's got a newer year model. So like, let's say I walk into a car dealership. It's like, hey, I want your latest model of a Ford Focus. I'm going to want like the 2021 version compared to like, I don't know, 2005. So latest version. Something else that you might use, like especially when something is organized chronologically, maybe not in a timeline, but it can be organized in a timeline, are like cause and effect. Now, I do want to warn you, because I'm also a computer science teacher, is just because something happens before does not necessarily make it the cause. There's a term in science called correlation, does not mean causation. So we have the carbon arc light bulb and the carbon filament light bulb. Just because the carbon arc light bulb came first does not necessarily mean the carbon filament light bulb was made as a way to improve this light bulb. In fact, especially in these different time periods where communication is very slow, people were coming up with very similar inventions around the same time. In fact, calculus was invented by two different people across different years. Someone might call that derivative. It's a function in calculus. So we can say, oh, well, the carbon arc light bulb caused future progressions of the carbon filament, but if we end up finding out, or if we know, especially if we would have background knowledge, or if the question would suggest, it could actually just not be related. So cause and effect is also very important. Correlation does not equal causation. Okay, so let's actually go into, so this was a graphic. Let's go more into words. And this is still lesson 2. So let's go more into this cause and effect. The cause always has to come before the effect. But not everything that comes before the effect is necessarily the cause. So, what happened because of the cause? A great way to know if like what is the true cause and what is the true effect is, would this effect have happened had the cause not happened? So like if I did not have the cause, I would not have the effect. So let's say certain burritos are known to like cause me stomach pain. And let's say I end up eating said burritos. I can expect the stomach pain to happen. Same thing, I'm feeling stomach pain. I ate a bunch of food and I don't remember what I ate. I know it could have been the burritos. But that humorous example put aside, let's use a more high-set type of question. So here we have the prices of goods and services are determined by the relationship between supply and demand. Okay, so this sounds like economics. This would have been 12th grade social studies equivalent. When supply exceeds demand, so it's like when supply is more than demand, exceeds demand, sellers must lower prices to stimulate sales. Okay, so especially right now with what had been happening with COVID-19, you are seeing a ton of sales everywhere. Stores, different places have not been getting enough foot traffic. People haven't been buying as many things in certain industries. So in order to stimulate people buying their items and them getting business, they are encouraging spending by saying like, hey, we have a sale. People who otherwise wouldn't be buying, especially for people who are out of work or making less money, now it's a deal. They're stimulating people. So this is called a buyer's market because the person who's buying has the advantage. So let's just call this buyer's market. Buyers are happy. Like, woohoo! Then on the flip side, on the other hand, when demand exceeds supply, hand sanitizer a few months ago, when demand, people wanted hand sanitizer, but there wasn't enough to go around for different reasons, consumers bid up prices as they compete to purchase items or services that they need or desire. I know this is extremely wordy, but the reason there's a difference between an item and a service. I can buy a computer, but a service I can get is internet. Internet. Then there's a difference between need and want. I need food, I need shelter, and you might also need psychological reinforcement, such as hobbies and other things, depending on how you are on the Maslow scale. That's something in science or something that you desire. I might want slightly more fashionable clothing. I might like for a better driving car, but I do need safety in that vehicle I am driving. So all of this is actually very much just defining mercantilism. So here, buyers, when we ran out of hand sanitizer, people who wanted hand sanitizer were not happy. I remember I was seeing like Clorox, people were posting on Facebook and Amazon, like the very greedy people were buying it all up and then selling it for later at like a super exorbitant price. So I know like at Dollar Tree, Let's look at my drawing skills. So here we have hand sanitizer. So it was $1 from the store. So it was $1 at Dollar Tree. That's just store. Okay. And if there was enough to go around, I could have just bought it at that really cheap price. But let's say that someone was very trying to capitalize, per se, on the demands. They would have bought all of these up and then maybe resold it. I was seeing just tiny little hand sanitizers being sold for $50. This is where that would be buyers would be very unhappy, but sellers were very happy. I bet toilet paper too. Companies must have been very happy that they were getting increased sales for their product. There we go. So before COVID-19 had really hit, paper was super cheap. In fact, it's very common for houses to be TP'd at certain points of the year. Hand sanitizer, it was just used in every school. You could find it anywhere. But then in the middle of the COVID-19 outbreak, this was no longer accessible for buyers because everyone wanted it or everyone needed it, depending on what kind of status they had. So then here, the supplies were running out because they weren't as readily stocked. So then people who had access to it were able to make a profit. Also, what happened is that a lot of breweries, a lot of distilleries, places that make alcohol, since this was a 70% alcohol content, they were able to, like, hey, we've got alcohol, we're alcohol distilleries, we can just go ahead and start making hand sanitizer. And that happened locally. I was seeing some distilleries making their own hand sanitizer, and they were able to fulfill that gap. So this would be called seller's market. In fact, if some sellers are happy in that industry, it is very recommended to also join that industry. So let's say if a COVID-19 or there was something very similar to reoccur, or if I went back in time, I would definitely open up a toilet paper company or a hand sanitizer company right before all of this, and I would make a very big profit. But let's say at a point where hand sanitizer is just really cheap, no one wants for it, no one cares for it, and then it doesn't make much sense because the buyers are the ones that have the advantage, not the company. So, word of advice, always be a buyer in a buyer's market if you can, and be a seller when it's a seller's market. Also, if you're kind of interested in stocks, sometimes when it's not a buyer's market, some people will get rid of their inventory of certain items and they'll pick it up, such as like homes in certain areas due to sell and rest will be sold as people want to relocate. Someone who wants to take the advantage after like the city is peaceful again, they'll make an advantage reselling those homes afterwards. But here you have to determine what is the cause and effect. So increased supply decreased demand. It's always going to be inversely related. Okay, miss, that sounds something like math and science. What does that mean? Okay, they're opposites. They will always be opposite. There's sometimes a happy point, but it can just be thrown out of balance. So supply versus demand. So if there's really high supply, if like something's free or like there's a lot of it, there's not a really big need for it. Or if there's not enough to go around, something becomes rare, there's going to be a higher demand. And that's how companies control prices. And some places were purposefully, rationing out their supplies, maybe of chlorine, hand sanitizer, and toilet paper, in order to keep a steady demand. Because if they ran out all on the same day or at the same time of a day, like let's say everyone restocked at night, there would be a higher demand when they would run out. So some places they would restock throughout the day on these very important supplies. So do keep in mind, it's the same thing with gasoline prices. If any of you have family who work in the oil field, when there's a very high supply, like when the oil workers have finished, or like they're finished their contract for like 7 months or so and they come back home, there's a very low demand for their work because they just finished. So oil becomes very cheap. Gasoline becomes very cheap for the consumer. So then when we start like running out of our supply, there's an increased demand, gas prices become very expensive, more expensive, and then because there's a lower supply, oil field workers have to go back to work. So if you know someone who works in the oil field and they're home, buy gas. When they're going to go back to work, buy gas before then, because the price will usually go up. So we have cause and effect. Oh, I forgot to write the main point. So a question might ask you, based on the theory of supply and demand, and it gives it to you right here, or right here if you like the shorthand version, under when would you expect prices to rise? Okay, so prices to rise when you're going to make something. So when would you expect things to be really expensive? When something is scarce. Okay, so price and demand usually go hand in hand, usually, and not always. It's like not many people are demanding to drive Tesla vehicles, but the price is sometimes, depending on what model you're getting, is a little more expensive. So decreased supply, very low supply, is going to drive up more of it. A higher price. Okay, next we're going to go into lesson 3. Now this is going to be very much like literature, where you're going to analyze the author's purpose and their point of view. So lesson 3, analyze authors. And this might be done through a political cartoon. For those of you who still read the newspaper, there's a lot of political cartoons done. I don't see many political cartoons on social media as of the past maybe 10 years or so. I think memes and like screenshots are the new political cartoon. Man, a few years from now, they're going to be using memes. Asking students about our old memes. And point of view. Okay. So, what is the purpose This is very much with literature. You might have heard this with your other instructor, is what is the purpose? Why are you writing this? So social studies, most of it that we study is going to be more political. Most people are not writing for pleasure. So the purpose is pi. The purpose is pi. So pi is an acronym. So are they trying to persuade you? Are they trying to inform you? Or are they trying to entertain you? Or themselves? So like the Diary of Anne Frank. It was a private diary. She did not know that she was going to get caught and sent to a concentration camp. That diary was her own way to kind of like sort out her own feelings. It was meant for pleasure for herself. But because it was, excuse me, let me just add some better lighting. Because of the time period that it occurred, it really helps inform us. And by like, if you develop a liking to Anne Frank and the different people that she like kind of sheds a whole new world of perspective into, it might be used to persuade us, and maybe seeing her as a victim of the Holocaust. So that's never just one of these things. So you might be seeing a lot of political memes going around. They're trying to persuade you. Political usually means persuasion. P for P. Usually political. Inform. Okay, think of those intellectuals, those big philosophy buffs. They're usually just trying to maybe inform or educate someone. Entertain. That's really the majority of us on social media. And I believe memes are the new political cartoon. So here we want to see what is the purpose and their point of view. Like, where are they coming from? Okay, so their point of view author's point of view is their perspective. Their perspective does not necessarily equal reality. It might be totally off from reality. It might only show a part of the puzzle. But very often it will not be the entire reality, especially when you're reading historical accounts from two different countries and who won versus who lost. The author's point of view does not always, nor, so I'm not using the word or because it's not or, so nor. Their perspective does not always, nor entirely, represent reality. So during the Great Depression, some people were unaffected by it. So you might read some of their memoirs, and it might inform you on how the higher class was able to deal with the Great Depression. But it doesn't show you the overwhelming reality experienced by the lower class and the middle class who just became non-existent. So especially when you're reading social studies materials, you need to find out what is their bias. So bias, what does that mean? Okay, so who do you favor? What's your favorite? So let's say let's say I'm a cat person. and I work at an animal shelter, or I'm trying to help, I'm helping a friend pick out an animal, and I might be biased towards cats. So, example, cat person, biased towards cats. Cat person might be biased against something that is not a cat. So just for practical purposes, a dog. This is not necessarily true. Talking about the cat person, I have both cats and dogs. But this is just a nice example to see the verbiage of using the word bias towards. So this means favor. Favor cats, and that I'm against, or this fictional person is against dogs. So you might see someone who might be more Republican or a more Democratic background. If someone is Democratic, they would be biased towards Democratic leaders. Not always. We have seen where different states vote for the opposing party because that actually aligns more with their values compared to the candidate and their party. Then we also would say, like, for example, a Democrat would be biased against a Republican. But not always true, but you do see what is their predisposition. So we all have a form of bias. So, for example, I might not like very sweet candy. I'm going to be biased against candy, but if I say sugar is horrible, you don't need it, your body doesn't need it, I might be partaking in something called propaganda. Just trying to get you a different color. So propaganda. That is extreme bias. So it's also called political propaganda. This is where it's condoning violence, hatred, and it's so focused on trying to persuade the person. So, like, number one, it is just persuasion. So let's say that you look at propaganda, but you're actually biased towards that ideology. You might not see it as extreme. Oh, but you will definitely be able to pick up something offensive or extreme if it does not align with your values. You might feel attacked. So let's go into an example. Oh, let me actually bring back propaganda. It's skewed. It's kind of bent out of shape. So it will trigger, it's meant to trigger an emotional response. So let's go back into, or let me just scoot this up. There we go. Propaganda. So they're trying to persuade people and to into believing the same thing they do. So persuade into believing the author's ideology. Unless you're a graphic designer and you're making political propaganda for hire. They also selectively, so they highlight only certain facts, and they will completely ignore or distort or distort. So highlight only certain facts, and then completely ignore or distort facts that don't support their ideology. They will also use loaded words. So this usually means words you really wouldn't use in polite company. This would mean a lot of, this can include racial slurs. I'm sorry, I do not have a lot of loaded words like that come readily to mind, nor will I use them. But this is basically anything that will be censored out of media target for children, or older media that is then being now being filtered. Like if you look at older Disney movies, there are certain things that are now censored, or warnings that they give you by saying like, oh, back then this was not. There was things that that are offensive, so like we're just letting you know. One example would be certain scenes in the old Disney film Fantasia. They actually have a disclaimer saying, we apologize that this is offensive, and this is how like the film was made, etc. Now that's not being propaganda. This is, if there was any loaded words, they're actually helping soften it. So this is not, that would not be an example of propaganda. And so the point of using these loaded words is to trigger, so like, I'm triggered, that trigger an emotional response. So, let's say you're in an argument with someone, and there's one thing that they really don't like about themselves, or something they absolutely detest, or they don't like it when it's brought up. Propaganda will work in the same way. Like if you're angry at them, and you mention that, knowing that it's going to trigger them, that it's going to get them upset, what happens after you do that? So like, let's say I'm in an argument with someone, and I know that they have an insecurity about their ability to perform their job. If I say it in a loaded way, very mean, like say like, oh, you can't do your job properly, or just being very mean, I might trigger, and I would be purposefully trying to trigger an emotional response that usually does not end well. People who are triggered, it could end up just being something like on Twitter, or it could actually result in riots or violence or other forms of civil unrest. This is how propaganda can be very dangerous. It can result in other people being effective, whereas the violence can spill out. Or we also have it where it kind of like starts to like, you could consider it brainwashing a generation from like different times, like through exposure. So like, let's say there's propaganda, for example, a very common thing is breakfast is the most important meal of the day. according to like medical research, that was not um, it is important, but that actually just started off as like a jingle for cereal to improve sales for cereal products, increasing demand so that they could sell more. So that'd be a form of propaganda. However, loaded words trigger an emotional response. In this case, it wasn't like an ugly emotional response. It was like, breakfast is important. I gotta eat some breakfast. Let me stop at IHOP or McDonald's for some pancakes or something. So, same thing if I'm talking about something called like a McMuffin or Big Mac or something. I'm loaded words gonna be big burger, emotional response. I'm gonna get like really hungry. I might start to even salivate. That's a way that'll manifest in my body. So like there's different levels of propaganda, and some of them might not be targeted to the people that they're against. They might be trying to change other people who are neutral and turn them on their side. So like there's different people. This is the author. This is audience. The neutral audience. And then I guess this could be the author's opponent. So before around the time of the Holocaust, there was a lot of anti-Semitic, which means anti-Jewish propaganda. So the authors, they would be anti-Semitic. There would be people who are neutral. And then the opponents, or you could even call them the victims of the propaganda, were people who were Jews or of a Hebrew heritage. So the objective was to either have them join in to like the author and to dislike their opponent. They sometimes political propaganda will just focus on making you like them, like, hey, we're trying to do this and this, and just like, hey, we're good. Or it might say like, no, they are horrible people because of this and this and this. Or they'll try to do both at the same time in the same message. But I will let you know that just because you are made to dislike the author's opponent, it doesn't automatically mean you're gonna like them. You might dislike them as well. Very common is that we don't only have two political parties in the United States. There's actually other political parties. So just because you might dislike one certain political party, maybe one political party has like convinced you that so let's say that this is one political party A has convinced you that political party B is horrible. That's not automatically going to make you like this one unless you're not very informed on your choices, or so you might just become like, oh well, I just believe in just some other like form instead. So very effective propaganda. Effective does not necessarily mean good for society. They will try to also make you like them. So they'll make you like them and make you dislike their opponents. If you look maybe like at the tweeters of like different like fast food restaurants, they'll just be mean to each other. But that might make you dislike their opponent, like different restaurants' food, but they still have to incite you to come into their restaurant. Okay, so we're done talking about propaganda for now. But I do encourage you to be wondering whenever you're looking at like a meme, okay, so like what's the author's angle here? Like what's their point of like having done all this work of creating content and posting it instead of just like sharing like the same cat meme all over again, like all the time. So here we have lesson 4. So here we are going to evaluate the author's reasoning and evidence. So let's say that you actually want to, let's say there's someone is making an argument and you want to contradict it, or you want to say like, okay, what is valid here in their argument and what is not. So you want to see like, what is their reasoning? You want to look at their logic. Is it weird? Is it twisted? What is going on? I'm just adjusting the light right here. What is going on? You want to find out facts, or opinions. So like a fact would be, gravity on Earth is negative 6.81 meters per second squared. Just the average. I know different depths of the Earth, it's different. Opinions. Something like water is not wet, if any of you remember that meme. That's just something that someone believes. A fact can be proven true. Proven true. We have different ways and different measurements to do this. However, you will see people trying to argue otherwise. A lot of people believe that the Earth used to be flat, but different sailors began to notice that when you're actually doing the math to like find things on maps, it wasn't accurate. So they started ending up like doing like different little sections that if you ended up just putting them all together, it would actually start making like the part of a globe. So unknowingly, they already knew or had a hunch that the Earth was a sphere or round, if you. So opinions, on the other hand, are beliefs. So your opinion can be a fact. Like, I think like gravity on Earth is pretty light if you compare it to like a different planet. Or you say like, hey, gravity on Earth is it's pretty, really weighs me down. Well, you were saying that compared to the moon, yes. But then there's some opinions that are not very well founded on facts, or they might be on outdated facts. It was considered a fact that the Earth was flat back then, but through scientific discovery, we found out, no, it's indeed round. Well, especially since like we didn't end up sailing and falling off the edge of the world. So beliefs about a concept or situation. Then we have the judgment. Dun, dun, dun. So a lot of us know our facts. A lot of us know what opinions are, and then what helps you decide what side you're on in an argument is your judgment. This is your conclusions. Conclusions supported by reasons and evidence. Now, on the social studies high set exam, they're not going to be asking you does the word fact mean, or what does the word opinion mean, but they might show you like a passage, or ask you what was a fact in that time, or what is a fact from this passage, and then ask you, oh, what is also like an opinion in this passage. So you might have to label something as a fact, an opinion, and then a judgment. So these are kind of like what you start an argument with, and then at the end, that's when you make your judgment, your conclusion. So like there's a court case. What happens at the very end? You have the judgment by the judge. The judge has heard the different people speak, and then makes the ruling like, okay, guilty, not guilty, fine of this amount, or these repairs need to be done to fix this issue. So something I also want to talk about is credibility. Like, how credible are you? Like, if a scientist says water is wet, is not wet. Okay, they're a scientist, but what are they a scientist in? If they're like a scientist in philosophy, it might be very different from a PhD Nobel Peace. So like, just because someone is a doctor doesn't necessarily mean that they're an expert in that field. So just be very mindful of that. So credibility. Are they an expert? Are they an expert? An expert in that area? So like, let's say I am, a main joke that does occur is sometimes there are bloggers who try to give out advice, yet financial advice, yet they're living in, they don't have savings accounts, they're not making much, and they could be argued that they have no right in saying things about a certain topic because, one, they're giving out misinformation, they're giving out opinions, which is then affecting a lot of people. So let's say I want to build up my savings, I want to save money for a home. I am going to ask the person who has these things, not someone who is drowning in debt. Another example is, if you want advice to get muscle tone, you're not going to be going off someone's opinions who is not in shape and who's eating like a lot of junk food. You're going to ask someone who is in healthy shape and is also being very healthy. Again, you also don't want to go to like the opposite end of the spectrum where like someone's like, I gotta eat like 40 different meals a day, and like my meal planning is like so incredibly intense that like I really can't do anything else. Yeah, you don't want to swing back into opinions. Facts are gonna be facts, and they're like a strict kind of a certain line. You go too much this way, or you go too much the other. You got to be very careful. Sometimes you have people who have ideologies that were more this way. They were raised a certain way, very strict. They ended up becoming extremely loose. Or you have people who had very chaotic childhood, and then they become very strict. So you just have to know your facts. You need to know facts. That way you can calibrate yourself and balance yourself. Otherwise, you're very uneven. Okay, so let's see. Okay, the next thing is a little bit more about statistics, and then we'll talk about U.S. history. So this is a great time to pause as we kind of shift gears. So I'm going to go ahead and just just save that for another example. So in the comments, let me reference a meme that has gone around, or a different sayings that would be considered forms of propaganda, maybe light propaganda. And give examples, because the reason that we study history or social studies, the reason we study society, is so that we can understand the world we're living in today and then make future adjustments for that. Very much like statistics. So have a wonderful evening and see you tomorrow.